When war broke out in 1914, many people were affected by it. We are from Manor Primary School, Uckfield, East Sussex, England, and we have been looking at the lives, memories and stories of Sussex women, children and families who were left behind while men went to war.
With many men away at war, the home population was struggling to cope with day-to-day life. Families were left without the support of their husbands, sons and fathers.
Separation allowance was paid to all married soldiers, their wives and their children, if the wife could show that they were of good character. In July 1915, this allowance was raised to 12 shillings and sixpence.
What we need to understand is what life was like during the war years.
Our group looked at food during the war.
We think food is an important place to start to understand how people were living then. Before the war there was a food shortage because they weren't getting enough food.
Yeah, and because all the ships were coming across and all of the U-boats were sinking them.
They had a garden, they would make it into an allotment so they can grow their vegetables.
There was a poster for Dig for Victory to help people know about it.
It was about growing your own crops and that, so you can eat them freely and have more food and save your money.
Well, this is the mince that they were growing, and this is the lettuce, which doesn't look that good. These are spring onions that they used to grow, and another lettuce and another mint there. Nowadays we would have probably thrown all these out, but they used to regrow their food.
Well, in our class, every morning we came in and we'd get our water bottles and then we'd go and check our plants, take them out, give them some water. If they didn't have clean water, then we'd tip it out and give them some new water so they'd be able to grow better.
I was quite shocked on how much the potatoes had grown in 3 weeks, because before they were just a slice of potato with a little eye popping out the top, and 3 weeks ago we planted these and they just ended up growing really tall.
Rationing was about when you had enough food, you had every time you had everyone had the same amount of food.
And there was queues in shops, so the people at the front would get more meat than the people at the back, so they started rationing. And there's a ration on meat, so the dads can only eat it. But then it changed because dads did most of the work, but then women went to work at men's jobs, so they got the meat as well.
It came in near the end in 1918, when it was just about to end. They grew carrots and leeks and basically all sorts of vegetables so that they could get a wide variety of vitamins and so they could keep healthy.
Eggs weren't rationed because chickens just lay them, and if you had chickens you could easily just get eggs from them, and they weren't rationed because of that. There was a campaign called Eat Less Bread because they didn't have the right amount of things to make it. They didn't have enough wheat or flour or that sort of stuff.
The trench cake, I actually made some to give around the whole class, and they had to ration a lot of things that way. It wasn't the best taste, but they had to put vinegar in so that it would go longer and they could send it to the trenches. That's where they got its name from. And when they sent it there, when the soldiers got it, they felt good. I found the rationing really interesting because I didn't know in World War I they would need to share, because I thought they would have loads of food. If we had to have rationing today, I'd probably miss the most sugar, because I love sugar.
What I would miss the most if we have rationing is probably the meat, because I love chicken.
I'd miss a lot of things, like chocolate, meat, everything.
Our group looked at what life was like for the women when the men went to war.
Separation allowance was paid to women whose husbands went to war.
This was a time that women stayed at home to look after families and didn't go to work.
So they didn't have much food or money, so they had to eat as little as they could, and they didn't have Tesco's like we would. They would have different shops like butchers and grocery, and they had special books to buy the food, rationing books.
And then they had like little tokens in them.
Stamp things?
Yeah, so they had to give them to their local shop. If you can't go to another shop or they wouldn't take it, you can only go to your local one.
Even though they didn't have much food or money, they still suffered to help their husbands at war because they made them trench cake and it used up most of their food, but they didn't mind because they wanted to help their husbands.
They had to make clothes out of what they had, so curtains, bed sheets, things that would make them clothes, so they didn't spend money on trying to get materials.
They only had 2 outfits and they wore one of them for the whole week and then they used one of them for their Sunday best just because that it was their Sunday best and they didn't want to make it dirty or anything. And they had to keep washing the one that they wore all week with their bare hands.
They wouldn't have had laptops, computers, phones and loads of other stuff, so basically their only entertainment would be a radio.
Instead of sending messages like we do now, they had to send letters to their families at war.
Like because you probably know if you say goodbye to someone for a couple of weeks, it's quite hard because like you always have them in your life, and if they're not in them, it's like some part of your life's not there, and especially for like 4 years, it must have been horrible. Like if like a child didn't see their dad for like 4 years, it must have been horrible.
The only way they could find out if their loved ones are still alive or wouldn't know about the war or stuff was in the newspapers. They couldn't go on the internet and look up news or anything.
Our group looked at what life was like for children. Families were generally larger in the time of World War I, so the mother was left with all the children to look after. I would find it really hard at school because they probably missed their dad and then they probably wouldn't want to go to school, and if they got told off, they would have got hit with the cane or got to sit in the corner.
In World War One, the boys and girls got separated at school, so they had to go in different entrances and they didn't have the same classroom.
So they would have had a really hard time because it would have been every single day they would have had the same lunch, and they would have got really told off if they'd made a mistake, and they would have gone into the corner and had the hat on.
Oh, well, the hat was called a dunce hat. I think it meant something along the lines of idiot or disappointing or something.
It must have been quite hard in the playgrounds because they didn't have as much games as like we would have today.
The children would have had to do a lot of chores, like going, if they had a farm, they would go up in the fields and do all the chores if their mum wasn't there and she'd be one of the nurses. So they would have to do all the chores that she does, all the chores that the dad does. The older sibling would have had to put all his brothers and sisters to bed.
Well, most of the families were running low on money, so some of the children, probably more the boys, would like do something to earn money. Like in our story that we're reading, the boy becomes a shoe shining boy to earn money. The work that the children had to do when their mother was at work was ironing, but they had to do it hand washed because they didn't have technology back then.
It might not be just their dad, it might be their brother and granddad or some other relatives who went to war as well.
You'd be like, why are you going? And they'd be going to war. You wouldn't see them for a long time, or you wouldn't see them forevermore.
I would feel really upset because I love my family. That's like the precious thing to me. You'd miss them because I do a lot of stuff with my dad. He teaches me stuff.
I would be really upset because I love my dad a lot, and I love my granddad and all my other relatives.
Our group looked at men on the home front.
Not all men went to war.
Some of them were too young, too old, or they had important jobs that they couldn't leave.
One of the jobs that men did was ploughing.
There was age restriction on the men to go to war, which is 18 to 40.
They worked at train stations.
And bank blocks.
Yeah, they worked at banks as well.
The woman gave the men white feathers to say they were cowards because they didn't go to war.
They also did coal mining. Farriers did all of the horses' shoes. When the men went to war because of the shortage of the men, the women had to start filling in their jobs.
In World War I, they had night watchmen, so if they didn't go to bed at a certain time, the night watchman would come and turn off their lights.
Our group looked at two things: how the roles of women changed and the woman at work.
With many men away fighting, there were still jobs needed to be done at home.
For the first time, women were employed for doing some of these jobs.
There were also jobs created by the war that the women needed to do.
They had lots of jobs, they were maids and they did farming. They also did worked at the munitions factory and made bombs. Pretty much all the women did all the men's jobs.
They would go in the munitions factory and they would make loads of bombs and shells for the war, and that would get them some money for their family and the food.
The rich people had maids, as Harry said, and they have maids, so they work for them because they're rich and they can buy people to work for them, so they can do stuff for themselves.
Before the war, it was all the men working because women weren't allowed to. But then when everyone went, the women had to do the work.
The munitions factories were dangerous because the bombs fell and blew up some of the factories, so they had to rebuild it as quick as they could, and they just used what they had.
It was quite dangerous there.
Once when my great-great-granddad was driving one of the trucks, a bomb went off quite far, but specks of it hit the back of the truck, and my granddad was taking the people out of it because he wasn't that bad injured.
My great-great-granddad, he drove lots of cars to get everybody in and take them out of war and in war.
It would have been quite hard for them to swap from going from working, just doing house chores and stuff, to big factories and being busy all the time, not getting space to just breathe or something.
Most rich people didn't have to work a lot because they had a lot of money and they didn't really need any more. And most poor people, most women needed to work, like Fleur and Adam said. They were in and out, and most women worked 24/7, which was really hard for them because they had children as well and they had to look after them.
Some women, even if they were rich, they probably still would work because they were doing it in the munition factories. They were doing it for their country, and maybe if they had others out there, maybe that could save others, and yeah, it would just be a nice thought.
Our group looked at these suffragettes.
There were some major changes in this time, including women campaigning for women's suffrage.
Women's roles were really changing and some women campaigned for change. The suffragettes were women that wanted the right to vote, and they didn't want the men to just have do all the things every time.
The suffragettes were a group of women who really wanted the right to vote, so they used violence to help prove their point. And there were lots of people who joined the suffragettes as the campaign moved on. There were things like they chained themselves to fences. One of the most well-known suffragette is Emily Davison, and she threw herself under King George V's horse, and most people believe that she was trying to get a votes for women sash on the horse.
And sadly, when 3 days later Emily Davison died in hospital because of her injuries after she threw herself in front of the King's horse. Another main person of the suffragettes were Emmeline Pankhurst, and I have a poster of her, and she was one of the most, she led the suffragettes. There's lots of different pictures of women that were handed in by one of their relatives, and the artist put them all together with a special machine and made a picture of Emmeline Pankhurst. The reason why I have this poster is because my great nan is in it 3 times.
In jail, the suffragettes went on hunger strike, so they were force-fed.
They went on marches, and the main march was in Hyde Park in London, near the House of Parliament, and they had about, I think, over 50 marches.
The suffragettes had protests, and in their protests they would do things like chain themselves to Buckingham Palace, because the royal family was seen to not agree with what they were doing, and they would also shout votes for women, and they would try and pin up signs in places. During the war, the suffragettes sort of all pulled together because they didn't want to be involved with violence during the war. So then by the end of the war, women were allowed to vote.
In 1918, women finally got their votes when they were married and they were over 30.
The suffragettes had 3 main colours, which were green, purple and white, and they mainly had them on their badges, and they also wore very fancy hats to show that they were suffragettes.
If people weren't part of the suffragettes, they would sometimes wear badges to show that they were supporting the suffragettes, but they weren't part of the suffragette campaign. Sometimes they also wore, as well as hats and badges, they wore sashes across themselves saying votes for women.
They stamped coins with the logo votes for women.
And they stamped the coins. Most of them were put in jail because it was illegal to put their own logos onto the coins, and I think it still is. Without the suffragettes, women would still not be able to vote, and it would only still be men.
Our group is going to talk about the trips and the community day.
Year 5 went on an amazing school trip to the Imperial War Museum. We learned so much that we didn't already know. We found out loads of interesting things, and there was loads of different letters that we weren't expecting. All the rooms that they had were all tiny. They didn't have all the things that we used there.
My favourite thing was probably that they included the mini games to make it fun as well, even more fun.
We felt like we were grown-ups, and we went in there and we saw different pictures of what it was like, and we heard gun noises.
Well, I like the trenches at the Imperial War Museum in London because it felt like I was an actual soldier fighting.
The next day when we went after the Imperial War Museum, we went to Redoubt Museum in Eastbourne, and it's like a big like tunnel, and there's like so many doors that we investigated, and inside we got to try on these like war clothes, and also we saw like all the medals because they were all like hidden in drawers.
We even got to see planes and cars, and we even got to spin something which created the spinning of the aeroplane, and for a treat we went and had fish and chips.
On top of the Redoubt Museum, on top of where the soldiers lived, there was like a sea mine, but it was empty. There was like little huts, which I think led down into the little houses.
They told us about where the soldiers died.
There was a wall that showed the soldiers that went in Sussex and the soldiers that actually lived. There was much, much less that lived.
There was a big, like, ginormous map of where the place, where all the trenches were.
At school we did this World War I afternoon, and we shared all the things that we made. So we had like these like little leaflets that we did all the research. So we got votes for women, men on the home front, rationing women on the home front, and all our parents came in and they got to experience what we were doing. I mean, we got these like little plants that we planted, and obviously there was like comments book at the end so they could write what they thought about it.
Loads of people were looking at my work and other people's work, so I felt very proud of myself.
I felt very proud of myself because everybody was like experienced what my work was about and like learning more stuff that they didn't know.
When everybody came in, I felt like I was important and everyone was looking, and I had a lot of people to chat to.
I felt really, really proud with all my work.
Having all the people come in made me feel really proud of my work. Not many people learn much about World War I because it's so long ago. They usually learn about World War II because more is known about it. But it was interesting.
One of the really interesting things we found were knowing people's own stories. Our research discovered local people who brought in some First World War items to show us and tell us about their family members who lived through those times.
We also researched within our own families to see if there was a connection to the war, and we were really surprised with what we discovered.
This is him. He's my great-great-granddad, Arthur Stephens. He was in the Royal Medical Corps in World War I, and he served in Ypres and St David's Hospital, Malta, and he helped many wounded soldiers coming in from Gallipoli. This is my great-great-granddad Latimore's sheet that said that he couldn't serve in the war because he had a bad illness, and he was given white feathers that said he was a coward because they didn't want people to know that was the reason that he couldn't go in.
This is my great-great-granddad's paybook. His name was William Timms, and this is where, like, if he got paid in the war, he would like write it in this book, and it's got all his address and his name and stuff. And this is his sheet that when you're like come out the war, this shows like that the sheet that when you came out the war and why you came out the war.
My great-great-grandmother's brother, Edward Pattenden, was in the First World War. This photo is of all the graves of the people that were in the First World War. And then this one is the actual grave of Edward.
This is a shell case that my great-great-granddad brought home when he was serving in war back to my nan, and it was in April 1917. It's really heavy and you can smell the gunpowder from it. when you're holding it. I spoke to my dad about my great-great-grandfather, Private Walter Smith. He told me that he served in the war and that his leg got shot off, but he survived with a wooden leg. Sadly, after World War I, he died of his wound because there was no antibiotics.
I asked my mum about my great-great-grandfather who was fighting in the war, and he was helping Belgium against Germany, and he got caught by the Germans and for his punishment was put in a row, and they went along, and the fifth person would get shot, and he got in the line twice and he survived both of them.
I talked to my parents about the 12 and Sixpence project, and they told me about my great-great-grandfather Richard, who was a soldier in the war, and he survived, but he was a prisoner of war, and when he was let out he was in the newspaper, and he survived all the way up till the age of 72.
We met counsellors on a French who told us about discovering medals from the First World War awarded to Private Albert Cordon, who was from Uckfield. She showed us the medals and told us about finding the medals on eBay. Many people from Uckfield joined together to buy the medals for the town.
We're looking to find a home for them somewhere in Uckfield where we can put them on display and then everybody can go and see them and find out more about this soldier. But you've got to remember, this is a story of one soldier, and it makes you think about stories behind all the other soldiers. More than 100 other soldiers that also, from Uckfield that lost their lives in the First World War. So it highlights the fact that there's a story, and a true life event behind every single soldier.
We also met Rosemary Keane, who is Private Albert Cordon's niece. She told us about her aunt, Ethel Cordon, Albert's sister, who told her about living through the war years. She also told us about the tragic love story of Ethel and her sweetheart, Arthur Crabb, who became a soldier but died during the conflict. Ethel never married.
What was your favourite thing about Auntie Ethel?
What was your favourite thing about Auntie Ethel?
Well, she used to, she had a mandolin and a banjo, and she used to play music on them. And I used to go tap dancing when I was 3 years old. And she used to put a board down on the floor, and then she'd play You Are My Sunshine, was my favourite. And then I used to have to tap dance from this board too.
We interviewed Mrs. Richards about her father, who sent his brother illustrations and letters because he couldn't read that much because he was only 5 years old, so he sent these really good illustrations to him.
He was 17 years older. There were other children in between. So at the beginning of the war in 1914, he was only 9 years old. And my father joined up. So he used to send these letters to his brother, who from the age of 5 used to receive these letters. And of course he didn't read very much, being only 5. So my father used to send him these letters with pictures.
I interviewed my dad, Stephen Swain, about my great-great-grandfather in World War I, because he served in World War I.
This medal here, this was given to your, now, can you remember who it was given to? Your
great-great-granddad?
Your great-great-grandfather on your granddad's side. And this was his Congressional Medal of Honour for service during the Great War, or the First World War, as we now call it. And this medal here, we've got that there for the sign of peace and hope on the front. And on the back here, it says, Great War for Civilization, 1914 to 1919. Now the thing that makes this very special is all the way around the edge here is all the details of your great-great-grandfather. Here's his serial number here for the army, which is 27746. Right, and he was William Neal, spelled N-E-A-L, and that was their surname at the time, and that's now your granddad's first name. And after here, it's got R.A. And R.A. stands for Royal Artillery, and he was a driver for the Royal Artillery, which meant that he drove all sorts of things from what you'd like to call jeeps and tanks and lorries. These medals were made from bronze, and it was cannons that were used in the Boer War, which was 1899 to 1902. That was fought in Africa. And those cannons weren't used anymore, so they melted down those cannons to get the bronze and made these medals out of that bronze. George V and Queen Mary. And this is their coronation medal. So this was presented to your great-great-grandfather in honour of the coronation of King George V and Queen Mary. And this medal here, this is known as a Commonwealth medal, which is George V, Queen Mary, 1910 to 1935. That was the time they reigned. And on the back of this medal is all the different countries that were in the Commonwealth at that time. And that means that these were the countries that the King and Queen ruled over at that time. So we've got, can you remember what your other great-great-granddad did during the First World War? He served this country because he was a police officer. He was a sergeant in the Metropolitan Police Service, which meant that he couldn't be what's known as called up, which means that they couldn't get him to serve duty in the army because he was still needed to work as a police officer during the Great War. Okay, well, it's been very nice to explain to you some family history about your great-great-grandfather. Thank you very much.
It has been an amazing journey for us as a school to walk in the footsteps of those brave women, men and children in the home front during World War I.
Life was very different for them, and there were hardships and struggles, but their spirit shines through.
What they went through remains as important today as it was at the time. We hope we have honoured their memories with our work.
My favourite part of the project was doing the acting in the hall because we could use our own ideas and learn as well as having fun.
I didn't really think there was so much to learn about and so much places to go. That was why I liked everything so much.
I most enjoyed writing the stories. I learned that I am a really good writer when I'm not that bad at art.
I loved all the clothes they had. I also learned that my great-great-great-grandfather was a soldier in the war and his name was Albert. I also loved the acting.
I enjoyed doing the acting because we could choose what we wanted to do.
My favourite part about the project was that we got to grow our own plants and check every day if it was growing or rotting or just staying how it was. So every morning I would have to do something different instead of doing maths next steps.
My favourite part was the school trips because it was really fascinating of all the things that happened in World War I.